Good evening, everyone. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, if I could ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilman Gary Donovan,
Councilman Gary Donovan, Councilman at Large, present.
Councilwoman Colleen O'Connor,
Councilwoman Colleen O'Connor, Council at Large here.
Councilwoman Bridget Hosky's absent, Councilwoman Melly Garthwaite is absent, Councilwoman Sarah Akbarali,
Councilwoman Sarah Akbarali, 3rd District, present.
Councilman Mitchell Galagnano,
Councilman Mitchell Galagnano, 4th District. Present.
Councilwoman Robin Watt Hamilton,
Councilwoman Rob Watt Hamilton, 5th District. Present.
Councilwoman Catherine Tucker,
Councilwoman Catherine Tucker, 7th District, present.
Councilman Victor Boris is absent, Councilman Robert Bruno is absent, Councilman Stephen Johnstone is absent, our chairman, Peter Mazzaro, is absent, and our acting chairman, Ronald Quagliani.
Ron Quagliani, Council at Large, and I'm present. Thank you, Stacy. Can you please read the call of the special meeting?
We just did it.
Okay, West Haven City Council notice agenda of special meeting of March 13th, 2023. Notice, in accordance with Chapter 3, Section 4B of the Charter of the City of West Haven, Mayor Nancy R. Rossi has called a special meeting of the West Haven City Council to be held at 6:15 p.m. on Monday, March 13th, 2023, in the City Council chambers of City Hall, 355 Main Street, 3rd floor. The purpose of this meeting is as follows. Mayor Nancy R. Rossi's presentation of the annual financial report for the year ended June 30th, 2021.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, Mr. Centofanti, floor is yours. Thank you. Can I have a package? Except for the top.
I'm going to use this presentation everybody has, just
Sure.
to walk through the highlights, and be happy to answer any questions. So, yes, yeah, I'll start with that. It references the other documents that you have, but yep. Sure. So financial statement highlights, on page 3, it's unmodified opinion on the financial statements, which is on page 3 in that larger document. The management discussion analysis is a good executive summary of the major changes and major activity during the year. Talks about general fund budgetary highlights on page 12, significant capital asset activity. The high school is your biggest one at this point, and your long-term debt did increase, again, most of that being related to the high school. So looking at your general fund, Exhibit C and D, and again, in the large document, unassigned fund balance is almost 5.7 million at June 21. It's but 3.56% of expenditures and transfers out. It's up from 2.24 prior year. So your net change in fund balance was almost $2.1 million increase. And then you'll see the extraordinary item, the casualty loss, $978,935. You also see a footnote disclosure related to that. So that was any transactions that were identified that were known to be fraudulent, were just pushed to that line.
So that's the CARES Act money?
It's really not CARES Act money. It's expenditures that were fraudulent,
Okay.
fraudulent
Gotcha.
disbursements.
Right.
So
Okay.
you ended up okay. We'll talk about the CARES Act. So, that was kind of more the guise that was used to create the fraud versus that actually being what monies were stolen.
Gotcha.
So the fund balance, where did that come from? That $2 million, 2.1. So your revenues and other financing sources were under budget by 3.2. Your property taxes were 371 over budget. And where the shortfall was basically in the restructuring funds from the MARB. They only gave you $100,000 out of the $4 million. Expenditure side is really where the increase came from. So your expenditures on other financing sources were $5.3 million higher than budgeted. And it came from a couple different places. General government was 1.6 million. Most of that, 1,351,000 being unspent contingency. Public Works was overspent by $452,000. Benefits and insurance were under by the 1.4 million, and most of that being in pension and medical, 1,466,000 underspent in that line. Education was underspent by the 2.6 million, and then the casualty loss, obviously not being budgeted, was a reduction of those. Allentown Fire Department increased the fund balance of $5,074,000. The prior year was $766,000.
Wait, excuse me, you said 5 million?
Sorry, 574,000. So if I said million,
Nice, yeah.
I meant the number that's,
In the station.
yeah. So what we, there was capital were budgeted, so what was kind of created out of that budget is a capital non-recurring fund for Allentown. I think that's a good way to kind of help them with their capital and moving forward. So I think that's something that would be valuable to formalize as part of their budget process. So if there's monies that they don't get to, that they can plan for future capital. And the other challenge that they have is to increase the pension funded percentage. It's at 35% at June of 21, which again, we know where the market is as compared to June 21. It's lower, so that's an area that if they have additional money in their budget, it's something that, again, they probably should push some of this 500 towards that kind of look. If they have a good year, the pension funding is definitely something that they need to put more resources towards to get that level of funding up. Sewer fund, increase of fund balance of 1.5 million. Prior year was about 1.7 million. So the sewer fund is doing pretty well with whatever your last rate increase was. The revenues were 11.8 million. In the prior year, what 12.1. Transfers out did decrease, which is the funding for the debt service. You know, that was part of what the increase over the prior year would be. So I think sewer, you know, again, looking at their operations, they would benefit from, in a lot of towns, is a separate capital non-recurring for sewer, especially when things are working. It might help your future capital plan and future capital replacement to kind of be putting some of this towards capital.
So just one quick question. When you said increase in the fund balance, 1.5, prior year 1.6, so that's cumulative now, so their fund balance as of the end it's 3.1 million?
Over the 2 years, that's
Right.
the increase.
3.1,
Yes,
okay. All right.
exactly. Internal service funds, or exhibits F through H in the audit. So one of the things that was done, the city has budgeted the $125,000 for OPEB. There was no trust established at year end, so that money was put into this, into the medical self-insurance. So I think you've set up the trust at this point, but at June 21, it was not set up. So that money is there to kind of move into that trust when the city's ready to do that, so you can kind of start that process. So the net increase in net position was almost 1.6 million. Prior year was 528,000. So looking at current ratio is just a good way to kind of look at where the liability, you know, where the fund is. So the goal is one or more. Your medical insurance fund, and we're looking basically, the current ratio is current assets versus current liabilities. So the big picture, do you have enough cash to pay what is current? So medical in good shape, general liability 0.07, and workers' comp 0.04. So again, those funds need some additional funding to kind of get you in a little better position, that where you at least have enough cash to pay your current liabilities. All right. So the CRF fund, so there was a separate fund created for that in the combinings on page 110 and 112. We call them non-major funds or other governmental funds. So the amount expended at June 30, 21 was 891,000. There's 259,000 to be spent in fiscal 22, and the total award was the 1,050,000. So the 891, just if everyone remembers the memo that came from OPM, it had a different number, and basically that's due to the timing. Some of the stuff that was submitted to OPM and approved was after June 30. So that's the difference between the 891 and I forget what the number is, 970 something that you may have seen on that other memo. It's that will be picked up in 22's audit as being spent. So pension and OPEB funds in the police plan at June 21 was in good shape at 92.31%. Increase in fair value of almost 31.5 million. Most of that has unfortunately been given back, which pretty much happened across the state with the market going the other way by June of 22. And the Allentown, again, we mentioned the 35%. They had a $1 million increase in fair value, but again, that's going to be has gone backwards. So June 22, the numbers will not look as good as where you are now. And the OPEB fund, again, currently at June 21, that's not a funded plan. When the trust is operational, that will show up in the audit, and that 125 that we talked about is the start of that. And the liability of June 30, 21 was the $30.7 million. Federal and state single audits. So from a Yellow Book compliance, the government auditing standards compliance, we had 3 findings that were material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. The vendor approval, the city payroll segregation of duties, and the education payroll segregation of duties. So these are what we consider either material or significant that should be addressed. And I know we're looking back, and I've heard that you've made some progress on some of this, so that was good to hear. But at June 21, this is where we're at. And as far as that goes, we had an unmodified opinion on compliance, even though we had the findings. The federal single audit, we tested 4 programs, 2 CDBG ones, your normal CDBG program and a disaster recovery grant, the CRF fund, and an ESSER grant, which is education CRF essentially. We had 3 findings related to the federal single audit testing, procurement, inspection, and debarment. That was the same as last year. It kind of ties into the whole purchasing and having formal policies that are required under federal regulations for when you're spending federal money. This CRF fund grant cash disbursements, again, like we mentioned at the beginning, that was the guise that was used towards that. That's what the expenditures were for. So the controls over that didn't really work. But at the end of the day, the city had other eligible expenditures, related to that grant. And CDBG disaster, just the reporting, there are reports. I know there was a gap in some time with your grants person, but there are some reports that weren't filed on time. Again, we had no question costs. There was an unmodified opinion on compliance. And the total federal money spent were almost $17 million in 21. The state single audit, there was 8 programs tested. I didn't list them all. They're in the smaller book on page 26. So we did have 3 findings, 2 of them related to subrecipient monitoring. So certain grants that the city uses or the Board of Ed uses to provide services, mostly daycare or school readiness programs. There's some required monitoring because you're passing that money to somebody else to run the program, so that monitoring needs to be put in place to make sure they're complying with the program and that type of thing. And then a community conservation grant, again, reporting, the reports weren't filed timely with the state. But we had no question costs. It was unmodified opinion on compliance, and the total state expenditures were the $87,259,000.
Excuse me, when you say no question cost, what does that mean?
It means we didn't find any money spent on something that was not allowable.
I understand, correct. I wasn't sure if it was the other way, that's why.
All right.
If you had spent money and nobody asked our side why it was spent, not you.
Right, yeah, no, if we saw something that we didn't think fit the program, then we would list it as a question cost, and potentially you'd have to give that money back. Okay, other recommendations, and again, I will have some formal recommendations, just based upon timing. This was just a very high overview, and again, unfortunately, I didn't give management a chance to look at these. Most of there will be other comments besides these. These are the comments that basically wouldn't be negotiable anyway, based upon the audit work that we did. Again, there will be some additional recommendations that management will see, and that document will come to you once it's complete. So capital assets, just a physical inventory should be done. The purchase order system needs to be implemented, because that's key to the whole vendor issue and controlling that. So use of that, so purchase orders happen as an approval before invoices show up. Cash disbursements, employee printing checks should not also mail, it's just a standard control. Bank recs should be formally documented. I think there is some review, but again, from the audit perspective, we can't always see that the review is completed. Same with journal entries, same concept, that there should be documentation of the review. Grants cash management, it's looking at the size of the accounts receivable at June 30 related to grants. Some of the reimbursement requests probably should be submitted more timely, so basically the city's using other monies to pay those bills, so it's just kind of getting a system in place that you're requesting the monies more timely. The purchasing and bidding, but documentation should be secured and retained. I think we just had some exceptions of items that couldn't be located, same with the quotes. All that needs to be saved, especially when, again, as I mentioned, when we talk about federal programs. Sewer, or this is Public Works, the finance department should be responsible for billing. I make this comment everywhere, just a lot of times other departments are doing the billing. It doesn't get communicated to finance, so we had some adjustments related to billings that weren't recorded until we asked the question, so. Generally, finance needs to be in the loop of that process for all departments. Budget transfers, just looking, if you looked at the RSI 1B, you'll see a lot of departments overspent, so the best practice is kind of that stuff to come before you and approve some of those transfers along the way. Then education department, HR needs to review employee changes for each payroll, again, a standard best practice. Education grant expenditures, this one's, I think, a repeat from prior years. It's just the activities should be charged directly versus charged to one place and then moved. So a lot of times what's happening is that the expenditures are charged to the general fund and then moved. So if you look at the Board of Ed budget, it's not representing the actual expenditures, because it's overstated, because some of those are grants expenditures that haven't been moved yet to the grant fund. Tuition revenue should be recorded gross, so that's something that really should be recorded as revenue and not netted against expenditures. Again, budget transfers, the same concept for the Board of Ed. They have a responsibility to approve transfers at a very high level, much higher than the city, but it's still a statute that says that should be done. And just the last comment is just an observation. I think the education department can use an additional accounting help just to level out and to really to strengthen internal control, because it's really managed by one person.
I have a real quick question on,
Where it said bid documentation should be secured and retained, and also the quotes. How many years should they be retained for?
You know, there is a record retention schedule that the state provides, so I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head what that says, but anything grant related, not clearly, at least until the grant is completed and audited, but I'd have to look up what that schedule says. Because you have to submit to the state library if you want to destroy any records. They have to approve destruction of records.
All right, thank you.
So required communications, I don't know if you received that letter, but just talk about that as part of the audit. We do audit estimates, which your estimates are, you know, the incurred but not reported, the claims liability, the pension, and the OPEB liabilities. Disclosures are clear and neutral. There were a couple of material audit adjustments, again, related to, I think, some of the grant receivables, and they're attached to that letter. The casualty loss, again, is something that was different, so it's just highlighted in that letter to make sure paying attention to that. And then the fact that we are independent performing the audit. And future considerations for 22 is this new lease standard. After doing it the past year, I can tell you it's no fun, but it's something that's it's kind of required. All leases now are treated as an asset, right to use, and a liability, what you have to pay for that right. So it kind of changed the rules where we only did that for certain kind of leases. Now all leases are treated exactly the same, so it's kind of a big project. And then there is the lessor side, and the most common one is, I don't know if you have any cell towers, but towns that have cell towers and someone's paying you a lease, that will get recorded as a receivable and as a deferred revenue in a sense. So GASB likes to just hang stuff on the balance sheet instead of just disclosing. So that's something that new that you'll see for 22. And then 23, there's GASB 96, which is basically software subscriptions. So basically it's the same standard, it's a lease standard. If you're leasing software over whatever period, you're gonna have to book the asset and then the liability also. This has probably a much greater impact on education, because they do quite a bit of that, where a lot of the software they're buying is for a 3-year period. All right, so those were my highlights.
So, I have a question, and then I'll open it up to the council for questions if they have any. So, I try to calibrate myself, right? This is a snapshot in time of over 2 years ago, right? So this is the 2021 fiscal year, and so when do you think you'll have the 22 audit available? Because that will inform us a little bit more on what progress was made between 21 and 22.
Yeah, but I don't know if I have a specific answer. It's probably gonna be a couple months, because I just got
Okay.
finance the audit adjustments. Once they're posted, we get new trial balance, we could start the process. So we're hoping to start the process the end of the month. So
Okay.
unfortunately, you're not gonna have it for budget time. You know, you have to rely on whatever projections you have internally.
Right. So it's a couple of months.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then, Mr. Taylor, thank you for being here. I've never officially met you, but we look forward to working together with you. I guess my question is either to the mayor or to you, Mr. Taylor. So obviously, some of the findings here are repeats. I mean, I've been on the council since 2015, and some of the segregation of duty comments go back several years. So I would imagine that based on the findings, that we have to put together a management response and a plan to kind of identify what we're going to do to close these findings. I know that, you're relatively new to the position. You've been here, prior as the assistant, I believe, and now working with Whittlesley and others. I would imagine that this is a priority because, listen, I think some of our problem has been the fact that we've had a lot of open positions, i.e. the surplus in this particular audit, I think, with a lot to do with open positions and being able to have people that stay in a position for a good length of time. So now we have that, I think, in our purchasing department. Hopefully I could say that we have that in our finance department. In cooperation with MARB's assets, I'd like to think that we've started a lot of these things already, and hopefully we'll see better results when the FY22 budget comes out, but really in FY23 with the people that are in place now. Would that be fair to say?
Hi, thank you for your question. It's already introduced me as David Taylor, the Finance Director. Yes, I think more you'll see that in '23. There was a lot of struggling going on in '22 based on my observation. Obviously, I wasn't here for very long in '22. We are pushing very hard to fill the positions, segregate the duties. We've made progress on many of these. And one of the things that the mayor's done is she's pulled together a team of department heads, representatives who can get things done. And we've already drafted responses and plans to all of these, as well as a number of other initiatives that we have going. And hate to give a preview on the budget, but there will be some talk about that when we get here. So as you would expect, when you're going to increase increase headcount, there's a budgetary impact. So you should expect that then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions from the council for Mr. Senafani or Mr. Taylor or the mayor regarding the audit that we haven't already asked?
No, I personally want to thank you for giving us a more thorough audit than one we had previously. So I do thank you for that.
Anybody else? Okay. All right, Mr. Senafani, thank you very much for briefing us on the FY21 audit. We look forward to FY22.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other discussion regarding the audit, we'll stand a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, we're adjourned, and we will reconvene at our regular council meeting at 6:50.